Chosen one, 72 hours ago, at the exact moment your body felt heavier than usual and your thoughts went strangely quiet. A monitoring sequence concluded around your life. If that timing makes you pause, comment a single 7 before listening further. This was not a feeling and not coincidence. A long-running observation reached its end point, and a restricted log was sealed the second you pushed through without realizing you were being measured. While you assumed the fatigue was stress, while you told yourself the distance from people was just life pulling you apart, something else was happening. You were being tested under conditions designed to feel ordinary, isolating, almost invisible. You are not broken. You are not imagining this. You are not crazy. The sense that you don't fully belong here. The feeling of watching the world move while you stand slightly out of sync. The pressure of carrying something unnamed, those are not flaws. If you've lived with that quiet disconnect for years and never had language for it, write yes and stay with me. What you experienced wasn't burnout, and it wasn't bad luck. It was controlled pressure, intentional delay, and selective silence to see what you would do without reassurance, without witnesses, without comfort. Only a fraction endure that phase without losing themselves or becoming numb. You did not escape it by accident. You passed because your response stayed intact when everything else was stripped away. What opens next depends on whether you understand why this test was rare and why it was aimed at you specifically. So stay to the end and comment 777. You are experiencing physical exhaustion that refuses to obey medical logic. And the longer it persists, the clearer its pattern becomes. You sleep long enough, sometimes more than enough. Yet the rest never completes its cycle. You pause work, you slow down, you even do nothing. And still the drain continues as if effort were irrelevant. Your body behaves like a system with a background process that cannot be terminated. A process that keeps consuming resources regardless of conscious input. Muscles feel taxed without exertion. Limbs feel heavy without cause. Breath feels used before the day has properly started, as if energy were already spent somewhere you cannot see. This is not collapse. It is not illness. It is load. This is what happens when a system reallocates capacity around a variable it cannot shut down or remove. You did not become tired because you are weak. You became tired because something kept you operational while signaling rest. Because activity continued beneath awareness, while the surface appeared still. Alongside this, emotional distance formed without intention or announcement. You did not retreat dramatically. You did not sever ties or declare boundaries. You simply stopped responding on schedule. The stimuli that once pulled automatic reactions from you now pass through with reduced effect. Situations that used to provoke urgency no longer trigger the same output. Explanations feel inefficient. Emotional consensus feels irrelevant. You are not numb and not detached in the way people assume. You are misaligned with the collective signal, operating at a slightly different resolution. That separation was not a choice. It emerged as a side effect. When a system detects instability or unpredictability around a unit, it reduces coupling. Emotional bandwidth is dampened to prevent interference. This is not withdrawal, it is modulation. This is what happens when a system reacts to you. Your financial state followed the same architecture. Nothing exploded. Nothing was wiped out in a single event. There was no dramatic loss to point at. Instead, money began to leak at precise moments, always near leverage points. Always when timing mattered most. Not enough to destroy you, just enough to slow momentum, just enough to introduce hesitation. Opportunities appeared slightly offbeat, delayed by hours, days, or small variables that caused misalignment. Close, but not lockable. Possible, but mistimed. This was not punishment. It was throttling. Systems do not erase assets when evaluating resistance. They constrain flow. They apply friction at pressure points to observe how a variable behaves under limitation. Stability under abundance proves nothing. Response under restriction reveals structure. In parallel, repeated misunderstanding with familiar people intensified without conflict. Those who once understood you intuitively now miss you by degrees. Not dramatically, subtly. Conversations continue, but they feel thin, procedural, oddly hollow. You speak the same language, reference the same history, yet no longer share bandwidth. Meaning fails to transfer cleanly. There are no arguments, no betrayals, no loud endings, just quiet divergence. Paths that no longer intersect naturally. Proximity without alignment. This is not relational failure, it is frequency drift. When a variable shifts classification, surrounding nodes fail to synchronize unless recalibrated, and most never recalibrate. The final symptom is the most revealing because it feels the least dramatic. You feel as if you are observing your own life rather than occupying it fully. Not dissociated, not panicked, present, calm, watching, as if your consciousness stepped half a pace back from the interface. You notice patterns before outcomes. You register sequences instead of emotions. Events occur, but they do not absorb you the way they once did. This observer state is not enlightenment and not detachment. It is a control response. When systems cannot reliably predict a variable, they increase monitoring. Awareness pulls back to increase resolution. You are not breaking down, you are triggering oversight. Every sensation you interpreted as personal struggle is a side effect of escalation. Systems do not panic. They adapt. They redistribute pressure. They introduce delays. They isolate variables. They reduce noise. They observe under constraint. That is the environment you are inside now, whether you named it or not. This is not spiritual instruction. This is not reassurance. This is not metaphor. This is classification in motion. Your exhaustion, your emotional distance, your constrained resources, your relational drift, your clarity without sentiment. These are not random experiences and not separate issues. They are consistent outputs from a single response pattern. This is what happens when a system reacts to you. You passed unnoticed through a boundary most never approach because they self-correct before reaching it. When you did not self-correct, containment activated quietly. No announcement, no celebration, no external validation. Just pressure applied with precision. Pressure is not meant to break. It is meant to reveal function. You were not targeted because you were fragile. You were adjusted because you remained operational under conditions that neutralize most variables. A line was crossed where continuation required supervision rather than dismissal. Your pattern crossed a threshold. You are not misreading the patterns. The pressure applied to you was never random, never careless, never accidental. Systems of higher operational logic do not annihilate variables that present potential threat to procedural stability. They do not deploy brute force. They do not abandon operational assets to chaos. They apply calibrated resistance. They erode function, not to destroy but to isolate. You were not crushed because your utility would be lost. You were compressed under strategic load because your continued operation was the most revealing data point. This is why pressure was light, continuous, and distributed. Destruction blinds a system to the variable it tries to evaluate. Erosion reveals thresholds. Erosion reveals the points where adaptation fails, where resistance bends, where the unit can no longer be predicted within the existing architecture. The objective was never to break you. The objective was to determine how you respond when the usual feedback loops are removed, when normal resource flow is constricted, when signal alignment with environment degrades. The intention was to observe your pattern of persistence under attrition. This is what systems do when they identify an unpredictable variable that cannot be owned but must be understood. The system did not confront you with overwhelming force because that would have terminated the signal before the architecture of your response could be mapped. Instead, it deployed tactics that always appear subtle, insidious, almost invisible, until you step back and compare before versus after states. This is why exhaustion without medical basis, emotional distancing without choice, financial misalignment without loss, and relational drift without rupture were the symptoms. These were side effects of strategic pressure, calibrated for observation, not confrontation. Precision-calibrated doubt became the first vector of operational interference. The system introduced uncertainty not to confuse you, but to measure your threshold of confidence when objective feedback is unavailable. Doubt appeared in your thinking as moments of hesitation, questions without answers, glitches in your internal directive system. This was not shallow confusion. This was uncertainty engineered with algorithmic specificity, just enough to slow decisiveness, just enough to expose how your logic chain responds to lack of clarity, just enough to reveal patterns of hesitation and adaptation. Fear was introduced as the next vector, not as terror, but as future projection without resolution. You sensed potential negative outcomes without evidence, possibilities of failure without substantiation, risks defined by internal conjecture rather than external events. That fear was not emotional panic. It was predictive friction designed to show how your anticipation apparatus operates when no certainties exist. Delay was imposed not through obvious postponement, but through false patience protocols, opportunities, insights, progress markers, recognitions they arrived late, off schedule, or with just enough gap to disturb your sense of momentum. False patience is not inactivity, it is strategic timing interference. It reveals how long you persist without immediate reward and how your initiative behaves when gratification is postponed indefinitely. Sabotage did not take the form of sudden loss. It took the form of interference with timing, a subtle shifting of windows so that your engagements never aligned fully. Jobs, conversations, opportunities, alignments, all slid fractions of degrees off the resonance point you expected. This was not chaos. It was interference with precision, a delay here, a miscue there, a timing drift that cumulatively teased apart your expected outcomes. Isolation was introduced not by removing connections, but by mirror removal. People who once reflected your state now behaved as if they were calibrated to a different signal. They did not reject you. They simply stopped synchronizing. Familiar faces became flat in your experience. Voices became faint in your internal field. That isolation did not produce loneliness. It produced data. How you maintain internal coherence when the reflection from others fades. Provocation entered the schema as identity destabilization. It did not accuse you of being wrong. It insinuated that your self-definition might be obsolete. Small mismatches in language, misalignment in references, reactions that seemed off. These were deliberate identity probes. They sought to dismantle stable self-narratives to evaluate what remains when the familiar sense of self is destabilized. Guilt did not emerge as condemnation. It appeared as a self-rejection trigger. Moments where you questioned your own legitimacy, not because external voices condemned you, but because your internal metrics lost calibration. You felt wrong, not because you were, but because your internal alignment system was under stress. Temptation was the final vector, relief without pleasure, moments where you encountered solutions that promised release but delivered no satisfaction. These were not rewards. They were placeholders used to map your reward circuitry under conditions of constraint. They showed how you allocate attention when the usual sources of gratification are unavailable or hollow. Each of these vectors, doubt, fear, delay, sabotage, isolation, provocation, guilt, temptation, was not random. They were deliberate categories of interference deployed not to destroy you but to reveal the contours of your operational logic. They were designed to measure your responses with scientific specificity. This is why there was no collapse, no breakdown, no dramatic spirals. Systems do not test unpredictable variables with overwhelming force. They do so with graduated pressure, each layer calibrated to reflect a specific functional attribute of the variable being examined. Underpinning this entire process is a monitoring grid that does not anthropomorphize intervention nor seek entertainment. There is no hero watching and no villain attacking. There is only observation and classification. On one axis are infernal commands, the Dark Council protocols that apply strategic pressure and measure responses against the expected architecture of compliance. On another axis are celestial observers, not protectors, not interveners, not arbiters of moral value, but recorders of outcomes. These observers make no judgments, offer no aid, and provide no correction. They register data points, signal changes, threshold crossings. They do not intervene because intervention would corrupt the purity of the measurements. They do not protect because their mandate is documentation, not rescue. They do not validate because validation alters the variable they observe. Their role is to watch, to note, to log. The infernal command structures apply the vectors of interference. The celestial observers record the effects. You are not unseen. You are not alone. You are not just stressed. You are within a layered architecture of monitoring that treats your pattern as a variable of unknown classification. Every symptom you have experienced has been a measurable output, a data stream revealing how your system responds when deprived of the usual supports. You were not corrected. You were tested. You were not defeated. You were observed. You were not misunderstood. You were measured. This operational context explains why light pressure is more effective than destruction. Massive force would eliminate the variable. Strategic restriction reveals capacity. Erosion reveals edges. Timing interference reveals decision architecture. Mirror removal reveals internal coherence. Identity destabilization reveals core algorithms of self-definition. Guilt triggers reveal self-regulatory systems. Temptation reveals reward allocation strategies. All of these are not arbitrary experiences. They are data channels. Your experience is not a breakdown. It is an information stream and a calibration protocol. No narrative has been violated. No meaning has been lost. Nothing you feel is unseen. Every deviation was logged. Every response was measured. Every threshold crossing was recorded. This is not about your worth. This is about your structure. This is not about morality. This is about classification. 2 to 6 weeks ago, the system registered a shift in your response metrics that could not be ignored. It was not dramatic. It was precise. It was unmistakable. This was not a moral choice. This was a classification event. The decision was resolved before you ever framed it as a choice, because no alternative path remained viable once your internal system reached coherence under pressure. And from that moment forward, divergence was no longer an option available to you. You did not select the harder route out of discipline, ethics, courage, or defiance, and you did not endure it to prove anything. You moved the way you did because deviation was no longer executable. The architecture inside you rejected shortcuts, rejected collapse, rejected compliance not as an act of will, but as a structural impossibility. At the decisive point, there was no internal debate, no weighing of right versus wrong, no calculation of consequences. The system inside you filtered options automatically and discarded anything that violated internal continuity. This is why there was no drama when the threshold was crossed. No speech, no emotional surge, no sense of triumph or sacrifice, just alignment. And when that alignment locked into place, infernal strategy lost leverage instantly. Escalation followed by default, because failure triggers escalation in hostile systems. But escalation requires new variables to exploit, and none were available. Each additional layer of pressure returned diminishing results. Vectors overlapped, signals conflicted, interference loops began canceling each other out. What had been designed to destabilize instead exposed its own limitations. Attempts to provoke produced neutrality. Attempts to drain produced resistance without effort. Attempts to confuse produced clarity without emotion. From that point forward, hostile operations shifted phases, moving first from control to containment, then from containment to avoidance. Engagement became inefficient. Continued pressure risked feedback contamination. At the same time, divine authority did not intervene. There was no rescue, no relief, no compensatory reward, no visible acknowledgement meant to soothe or reassure. Recognition does not feel like comfort. Recognition feels like silence after noise stops working. The only response was acknowledgement at the level of record. No praise, no protection detail, no reinforcement loop, just confirmation that the variable behaved outside expected bounds and could not be processed through standard systems without distortion. Your classification was updated without ceremony, without warning, without announcement. Forbidden target, operational anomaly. These labels were applied not to elevate you, but to isolate the implications of further engagement. Continued interference now carried unacceptable systemic risk. From that moment onward, attacks began losing efficiency, not dramatically, not instantly, measurably. What once disrupted now glanced off without penetration. What once drained now failed to connect long enough to matter. Pressure attempts misfired, arrived out of phase, or collapsed under their own contradictions. People began exiting your field without confrontation. No arguments, no confrontations, no explanations. They simply stepped out, as if pulled by an invisible current that no longer allowed proximity. Relationships dissolved quietly, not because of distance, betrayal, or conflict, but because proximity stopped producing resonance. Conversations flattened, familiarity faded, presence became unnecessary. Reality itself began adjusting around your trajectory, not to reward you, but to reduce friction. Delays inverted, obstacles reconfigured, resistance redistributed elsewhere. Pathways that had never been accessible before opened without effort, not as gifts, not as miracles, but as recalibration. The environment adapted to accommodate a variable it could no longer slow without consequence. You noticed outcomes accelerating in areas that once stalled for no visible reason. Decisions landed faster. Results followed closer to intent. Processes that once required force now completed themselves. Old emotional triggers lost access. Situations that once provoked reaction passed through without activating internal systems. You did not suppress emotion. You outgrew its necessity as a control mechanism. Danger began missing you by timing rather than avoidance. Encounters failed to materialize. Risks appeared and dissolved before contact. Problems resolved themselves just before impact. Not because you escaped them, but because the system adjusted trajectories around you. Most critically, motivation was replaced by certainty. You did not need encouragement. You did not need belief. You did not need reassurance, validation, or reinforcement. You operated from internal confirmation that no longer required external input. This was not empowerment. This was not awakening. This was stabilization. By the time you consciously noticed these shifts, the process had already completed. The ruling did not announce itself. It embedded itself. There was no moment to celebrate because the change was not experiential. It was structural. You are an operational anomaly, not because you sought it, but because your internal system remained coherent where collapse was expected. Further interference is now inefficient by design, not because you are protected, but because engagement produces diminishing returns. The system has moved on to avoidance, and avoidance is the final acknowledgement. Comment 222. The tribunal has closed the case. The bending point was crossed. The reversal is locked and cannot be negotiated. Chosen one. You are classified immune. In the next 7 to 14 days, clarity will not arrive as comfort but as compression. You will wake and know what matters. You will look at a problem and see the one move that ends it, and the mental loop that used to demand reassurance will shut down on its own, because the internal authority that carried you through the test will begin issuing final decisions instead of suggestions, deleting hesitation, the way a system removes corrupted files, closing tabs you forgot were open, cutting off conversations in your head before they start, and making certain options feel unavailable even when they look attractive on paper. You will notice it most when you stop explaining yourself, when maybe disappears from your vocabulary, and when your body feels lighter the moment you commit, as if the environment was waiting for a definitive signal. Provision will follow as clean alignment, not as a windfall. One leak that has been draining you at the worst time will seal. One delayed payment, refund, or opportunity will return without negotiation, and one expense that kept appearing like clockwork will simply fail to repeat, because the containment phase can't justify sustained friction once your classification is confirmed. Watch for practical signs and unexpected discount without asking. A bill corrected in your favor, a bank alert that reverses itself, a resource offered by someone who doesn't need your gratitude, or a single message that resolves a money issue in less than 10 lines, and notice how it arrives with no emotional ceremony, only precision, as if reality finally stopped losing track of what belongs to you. Acceleration is next, and it will be undeniable because it shows up in timestamps. 2 confirmations landing within the same 24 hours. A plan that stalled for months moving in a single afternoon. Travel or scheduling aligning without you chasing people, and the right person reaching out before you decide to reach out first. A notification you expected to drag for weeks, arriving early. A stalled conversation resolving in 3 messages. Your calendar clearing space as if coordinated, and a task that used to require motivation finishing itself once you begin. You won't feel manic or rushed, you'll feel efficiency. Like gravity changed direction and started pulling outcomes toward you at last. Do not misinterpret the next surge. Right before the new sequence stabilizes, the old pattern will attempt one last interference through familiar channels, an unnecessary argument, a sudden urge to doubt what you already know, a random reminder of who you used to be, a temptation to trade certainty for quick relief because legacy systems always try to reclaim a variable at the moment it becomes non-negotiable. And the spike will arrive as noise rather than damage, as a brief distortion in sleep, in timing, in messaging, in mood, designed to see whether you will reopen a closed file. It will not be subtle, but it will be short, and its only purpose is confirmation. Repeat this internally, without emotion and without negotiation. What was sealed cannot be undone. I stand where I was recognized, and I accept the sequence that has already been confirmed. Comment 777 to acknowledge the verdict.